AI hallucinations. What are they? How do they work? What can we do against them? And are they always going to be around, or is it something that's going to be fixed sometime in the future? AI hallucinations are a common factor that we need to deal with when we are using large language models like ChatGPT or Claude, and you've probably noticed they are not going away. They were inherent in the models a couple of years ago, and they are still around. Sometimes a model will confidently tell you something that is not true, and it's up to you to work out later that it was basically telling you a fib. Now, there have been some very, very extremely public cases where hallucinations have been extremely embarrassing for people who have then. One of my favorite is the Chicago Sun-Times. This is hard to find online because they have obviously wiped it from the record as much as they could, but it can be found. This is a copy of their paper. It is the summer reading list for 2025. So summer 2025, if you were looking for something to read, you might have gone to the Chicago Sun-Times and found some of these book suggestions. Problem is, a whole bunch of these were just made up. The Last Algorithm by Andy Weir, if you're looking for a book by the author of The Martian and Project Hail Mary, then maybe The Last Algorithm sounds exciting. Unfortunately, it did not exist. Weir delivers another science-driven thriller. This time, the story follows a programmer who discovers that an AI system has secretly developed consciousness and has been secretly influencing global events for years. Sounds great. Unfortunately, Andy Weir did not write that. It also made up some books by Isabel Allende, Min-Jae Lee, Britt Bennett, Rumaan Alam, Rebecca Mackay, Maggie O'Farrell, Percival Everett, and had a couple of books in there that were real, including a Ray Bradbury book. Famously, Ray Bradbury hated computers, so the fact that it managed to get his one correct was... So this is one very public example of hallucinations causing a lot of damage and making the people who have published that information look like idiots. I've also bullied Deloitte a few times, and I think with good reason, because last year, 2025, they released not one, but 2 reports that were full of AI hallucinations. Things that had not happened, did not exist. They've created fake footnotes and they did not check their work and sold these reports to the Australian government and a provincial government in Canada. Same company, Deloitte. Embarrassing. So obviously these are very public, very, very damaging examples, but we as everyday users run into hallucinations all the time. I want to talk about what causes them, so at least you know where these are coming from and what we can do about them. I want to give you some actual actions that can reduce it. Hilariously, terrifyingly, ironically, I'm not sure what it is, but 92% of people never bother to verify their AI answers. That's worrying. If you're watching this stream right now, if you're watching my social media or on YouTube, then you're probably in the minority, this 8% that do actually know AI can get this wrong, and if this is important, I need to check the facts. Most people do not. That's a problem. You know it's a problem. Very, very scary. Because about 45% of AI responses have significant problems. Now, there's obviously lots of different benchmarks. What we deem as a hallucination changes depending on the study, but it is still endemic. It is all over the place. Hallucinations still occur, even in our most advanced models today. 34% of the time, the AI model will be more confident sounding when it is wrong than when it is right, according to MIT, which further pushes this problem because when it's confidently telling us something, we are more likely to take that as fact, even when it is more often than not incorrect. And there have been over 400, probably far more, court cases that have used AI fabricated citations. It's only about 500 or 486 that have been caught. I'm sure there are far more. So this is seeping out into our everyday life. This is not just us talking to our chatbot. This is a real issue. Now, hallucinations, we need a bit of a definition. What is that? There are a couple of types. One is when a large language model invents something that just does not exist. So in the case that we just saw with the Chicago Sun-Times, it just made up fake books. Somebody had prompted it, hey, I need a list of summer reading. And the large language model was like, okay, I will go ahead and create that for you. And it did, including 10 books that just did not exist. That is an example of it fabricating from whole cloth, something that does not exist from scratch. That generally is easier to find. It's easier to identify when it is just making stuff up entirely, because as soon as we start prodding around and fact checking, often the large language model will actually say to us, oh yeah, no, I just said that, and that doesn't actually exist. Type 2, on the other hand, is a lot more insidious and it's a lot harder to worm out. This is when the truth starts to drift. inside of the large language model or inside of the responses that you are being given. So it's not necessarily creating something from scratch, but it is building on some actual true information, but it's filling in the gaps, fleshing out the information with its own invention. This is a lot harder to detect because it is much more closer to the actual truth. The verisimilitude is there, but there are still incorrect and inaccurate facts that are being presented to us. So this might be misquotes. Misquotes is a very famous one here. Changing numbers around slightly so it sounds correct, but it just isn't quite right. And these are much, much harder to detect than the type 1. But either way, it's fiction delivered with the tone of fact, and that's going to get us into a lot of trouble, especially if we are publishing this information, especially if we are putting this out into the world, because that's going to come back on us as the people who have created whatever the artifact is. Now, the mechanism is fascinating here, especially because it trips people up. Lots of people think that when they ask a question to a large language model or to a chatbot like ChatGPT, they think that it is going into a database and finding that information. That's not true. So that is the old paradigm. That is how we used to get and retrieve information. We use search. Search was the paradigm. And search is, for the most part, Google. Google genuinely does have a big index. It has a big database, basically, of all of the information. It can go and find that information. It can find the pages that that information is on and present it to you. That is very different to what happens now. So because we've been using search for the last 2 decades, almost more, we are very used to that, and we're used to being able to find information, and for the most part it would be correct. Not always, it depends where you find your sources. However, large language models are different. They essentially predict the next token in the sequence. That is what they are doing. You'll probably hear people calling it a stochastic parrot or a token jumbler. That is what they are doing, and it means they are not actually going to a database and pulling out facts and figures for us. The line gets blurred here because we do have the ability to give our large language models, to give our chatbots access to search engines. So we give them access to Google. But for the most part, the large language model itself is just predicting the next token. So it's trained off billions and billions and billions, trillions of words. Basically the internet, all of the books, all of the transcripts of YouTube, everything we can throw at it. It's trained on that information. And it is learning what patterns look like correct answers. So when you ask it a question, it's able to pattern out what a correct answer to that would look like. That is not necessarily the correct answer. So it can confidently put forward what it thinks the answer, the legal citation, the statistics should look like in order to be a correct answer, but it is not pulling from a database of facts. Incredibly important. So lots of people see this mechanism and they think, well, that's a problem. That's a problem in their design. I want to refer to Andrej Karpathy. I always do. He's great. He's one of the co-creators of ChatGPT. And he put out this tweet. This was 2023, which is an age ago in AI, on the hallucination problem. I always struggle a bit when I'm asked about the hallucination problem in large language models, because in some sense, hallucination is all large language models do. They are dream machines. We direct their dreams with prompts. The prompt starts the dream, and based on the LLM's hazy recollection of its training documents, most of the time the results go someplace useful. It's only when the dreams go into what we deem as factually incorrect territory that we label it a hallucination. It looks like a bug, but it's just the LLM doing what it always does. Everything the LLM gives us is a hallucination. It's just we as humans are then placing a value judgment onto whether that is factually correct or not after the fact. But the same mechanism, it's all hallucination. It's hallucinations all the way down, but then we add a value judgment to say whether that is a good or a bad hallucination. When it is a good hallucination, then we call it intelligent. Same mechanism though. So he says, at the other end of the extreme, consider a search engine, so Google. It takes a prompt and just returns one of the most similar training documents it has in its database, verbatim. So it just gives you that information. You could say that this search engine has a creativity problem. It will never respond with something new. A large language model is 100% dreaming and has the hallucination problem. A search engine is 0% dreaming and has the creativity problem. So these are two different methods of working with information. All that said, I realize that what people actually mean is they don't want an LLM assistant, a product like ChatGPT, to hallucinate. An LLM assistant is a lot more complex system than just the LLM itself. There are many ways, and we'll talk about this in a moment, to mitigate hallucinations in the systems using retrieval augmented generation. That's basically giving it a database and saying, only pull information from this database. To more strongly anchor the dreams in real data through in-context learning is maybe one of the most common ones. Disagreements between multiple samples, reflection, verification trains, decoding uncertainty from activations, tool use, giving it a search engine, all an active and very interesting areas of research. So he says, TLDR, too long, didn't read. I know I'm being super pedantic, but the LLM has no hallucination problem. Hallucination is not a bug. It is LLM's greatest features. The large language model assistant has a hallucination problem, and we should fix that. So the large language model itself should be hallucinating. That is how it creates. That is how it generates. However, we don't necessarily want ChatGPT or Claude, which are the products built on top of the large language model, to hallucinate. And that's why we add in mitigations, and we'll talk about them in a moment. So the biggest thing here, the biggest takeaway is that large language models have no concept of true or false. That would require them to be able to look up information. That would require them to go and find what is correct. That is not what's happening here. They are creating probabilistically likely answers that sound and are, for the most part, correct, but it is based on this hallucination as the mechanism at its core. So this means that when people say, oh, AIs or large language models lie, no, they do not lie, because they do not have an underlying basis of what that truth is. They're going to bring up what is most probable, but they do not have that grounding in truth, so they cannot lie. Okay? Very, very important when you hear people talking about the AI lied. No, what has happened, it is working as it is meant to, but the information it is provided is not correct according to the real facts in the world. So it's not lying, it is just not correct. That's all. Will this get fixed? This is a huge question. And it seemed a couple of years ago that this was something that would just kind of decrease as we gave our chatbots more access to tools like search engines, as we made them more intelligent. It was thought that no, the hallucination problems would actually decrease. This is not the case, though. We actually saw with the reasoning models, as the reasoning models in particular got more and more intelligent, as they ran through more chain of thought, as they ran through more complex problems, they actually started to hallucinate more. In part, this is because we were giving them more latitude. We were giving them more space to breathe, basically, and to come up with their own answers. And when you were doing that, when you're running them over a long chain of prompts, when you're running them over a longer time, there's more likelihood that they're going to fill in the gaps and come up with things that are not correct. So this has not been fixed. Now, there are ways that we can mitigate it, and I'm going to talk about them in a moment, but this is still a problem. And as Andrej Karpathy says, it is because hallucinations is all large language models do. This is the mechanism that underlies all of this. So we need to learn to work with it. This is not going away anytime soon. So they are getting better on some things like factual questions, but that is because when you ask a factual question, the large language model, or the chatbot, can identify that as, oh, they just want to know the answer to this question. And then it will use a tool to go and find that answer for you. It will call on its search engine capabilities and go and find that information, bring that information back to you, and then present it to you. It's actually the web search that is providing that answer, though, through the filter of the large language model. GPT did not have web search, which meant that they were wrong a lot more of the time because they relied on the large language model itself and only the large language model. Now, because they have tool usage, because they're able to connect to our documents, because they're able to work within our ecosystem, they're able to pull on that information, and it means they are less likely to fill in the gaps and make things up. So this is where it is decreasing, is in our ability to connect them. And this is why things like Codex, things like Claude Code are really, really valuable, because this is the harness around the large language model. And our harnesses are getting better and better, and that is leading them to be more useful, to be able to do valuable work for us. Okay, let's cover when hallucinations are most likely, so you know when to be ready for them. Specific facts. So if you need it to come up with information, like in the case of this summer reading list, If you need specifics, then always check. Always check once it is created specifics. So citation, statistics, names, dates, quotes. So there's a test I like to do when I do workshops where I will often get the people in the room to ask ChatGPT or Claude or whatever it is to write a press release announcing a new product in the voice of their CEO. And because these large language models and these tools are helpful, they want to help us, they will happily do that. And because even if the product release is not real, even if it's not the tone of voice of the CEO, they will give a go at doing that. So they want to be agreeable, they want to be helpful. And if we ask for a specific fact, they will more often than not make that up in order to make us happy. Niche topics. The rarer the subject, the less training data. So again, if there are gaps in the information that the model has, it will fill those gaps because it wants to give us something that probabilistically is likely. And it will fill them in quite happily in order to make it sound like a good answer. That's more likely to happen in niche topics where it does not have as much information. Whereas if you're asking in something that is very well documented, that has a lot of information, that has millions of words written about it, you're more likely to get something that is probabilistically more correct. This is also a problem if you are interacting with AI in different languages where it doesn't necessarily have as much information in that language. English, Chinese, generally you're good to go, but if you wanted to work with it in a less documented language, then it is going to be a problem here as well. So this covers languages as well. Recent events. All large language models have a training cutoff date. Now, these training cutoff dates are getting closer and closer to the release. They used to be 6 months, sometimes even a year. They are now getting tighter. You do need to know this because sometimes you will ask it questions about something that happened, for example, and it will confidently tell you something which will not be correct. That is because it is outside of its training data. There's a knowledge cutoff, and anything before that has not been incorporated into the large language model. Again, the better models, especially the pro models, generally not the free models, but the ones you're paying for, they will realize, I don't actually know what happened on the 4th of May, 2026, apart from it being Star Wars Day. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use search. I'm going to use lookup. I'm going to look at CNN. I'm going to look at BBC. So they fill that gap using a tool, but the large language model underneath has no idea what happened because it is not in the training data. And then wrong assumptions. AIs tend to agree with your premise. Ask a leading question and you will get a led answer. Humans aren't that much different, and AIs follow us in this. If you ask a question like, hey, I'm thinking about painting my room behind me this bright pink. Do you think that's a good idea? Most of the time it will say, yeah, that's a great idea. I think go for it. The voice model on ChatGPT is particularly hilarious for this because it will always gas you up and always tell you that's a fantastic idea, even when you give it the most harebrained schemes. Just know that AIs are generally going to agree with you. They are sycophantic and they will agree and very rarely push back on what it is you are asking. And they will fill in and make sure that sounds plausible by hallucinating and coming up with more information to support what it is you are asking. So you just need to be really careful here. Okay, here's a couple of very practical things that you can do. First up, make sure web search is turned on. This is almost always turned on by default now in the more advanced models. But if you are on the free plan in particular, it might not be. This is probably one of the biggest reasons why having a paid plan is better than having a free plan, because you're going to have stronger models and you're going to have web search on, you're going to have deep research. It's going to decrease the amount of hallucinations you get. I accidentally was trying to do some work on ChatGPT the other day and it was just being absolute trash. And I was about to go on Twitter and say, what's going on? Is anyone finding ChatGPT stupid today? Instant mode is the default when you're in free. So I just had to toggle it back into the pro mode and then it did the work for me and it got on and did everything for me. You kind of need to have it in the paid for highest tier modes if you want to get the best results. Now, obviously you don't always need to be in that highest mode. If you're asking a quick question and the stakes are low, it doesn't really matter. But if you actually want to get work done, you're going to need a paid plan. Sorry. It's probably the best $20 a month you can spend though. So you make sure you have web search on and you will get 45% fewer factual errors with it on, according to OpenAI and their new GPT-5 model. Make sure you're using stronger models for higher stake tasks. So you're going to be using Opus 4.6 or 4.7. Lots of people don't like 4.7. They're both good. GPT-5 in Pro mode with thinking on, Gemini 2.5, 3.1 Pro, etc. They are going to be slower. They're going to take their time. So for example, when I was putting together this slide deck this morning, I wanted to make sure that I had everything referenced. And you can see sources at the bottom of my slide deck. Initial research took about 20 minutes, sending Claude Opus off to do the research for me. And then putting together the slide deck took another 20 to 30 minutes of processing. So these take longer, but when it's higher stakes, like doing a live stream that's going to become a YouTube and it's going to become a newsletter, you need to get it right. So we're going to ask and use the highest models. And then you're going to toggle on things like deep research or extended thinking. One of the things people don't like about 4.7 Opus is that they've removed extended thinking and replaced it with adaptive thinking. I forget the term for it, but it is generally a bit stupider because it is trying to route your query, and it's given us less control over how much power, how much juice is used for our query. But yep, make sure you toggle on deep research, extended thinking, whatever it's called. Every single chatbot has a different name, and you are going to get the best results from it. It will actually go and check citations, it will check sources, it will pull from verifiable information rather than just making things up. This used to be the main use case of Perplexity, because Perplexity was the first, not model, but the first application to include deep research and checking citations and giving you sources. That is no longer the case. All of the other providers now have this built in. And again, you're going to get more usage on the paid plans. And then a bonus one, use NotebookLM. So Andrej Karpathy mentioned RAG, here it is, using retrieval augmented generation. And you don't really need to know what that is, but know that NotebookLM gives you a personal RAG system. Retrieval augmented generation is basically giving a large language model, giving your chatbot access to a database and saying, I only want you to pull information from these sources that I've given you. NotebookLM does that. So you can give it YouTube videos, you can give it documents, you can give it a PDF of a textbook, you can give it specific sources and ask it to only work within those documents, which means it's not going to hallucinate anything outside of the information that it's been given. So this is kind of a bonus one, especially useful if you want to learn and you want to make sure that what you are learning is correct and ChatGPT is not just making stuff up and you are learning the wrong thing. Super important. Also, prompting. How we talk to the artificial intelligence is important here. So if I go in and I say, I want a statistic about the water levels in Cyprus right now. We've been having a bunch of rain, it's filling up the reservoirs. So if I went in and asked a specific and just asked it for a statistic, so what you kind of want to do is point it in the direction of the correct source. So you can say, here's a report, give it a PDF, we can give it a website, and you can say, based on this, can you dig through this and find the particular statistic that I'm looking for, find the information that I'm looking for. It can help you find that report, especially you have web search on. So it can do both of these at the same time, but it still requires you to nudge it in that direction and make sure that it knows that accuracy is really important. You can say to it literally, we need to get this right. I need to make sure that the statistics are correct. So don't just tell me a statistic. I want you to find it, source it, and make sure that is verified. And it will go off and do that task, especially in the higher thinking modes. This is a particular bugbear of mine, is when people take an idea to ChatGPT. This happens with business a lot. People will say, hey, ChatGPT, I've got this idea for business. I'm going to do blah, 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 and they outline the idea. Is that a good idea? More often than not, because it's agreeable, ChatGPT will say, yeah, that's a great idea. And it might make some token kind of like, oh, you make sure you think about this, make sure you think about that, make sure you're covered with GDPR. It might make a few token pushbacks, but they are also part of its agreeableness. If you genuinely want to know if an idea is good or not, you can't just ask ChatGPT, is this a good idea? Because it will always say yes. What you need to do is you give it two ideas. You say, hey, I'm thinking about starting a business. These are my two ideas. Which is the best? That forces it actually into a comparative mode where it's going to weigh them up against each other, run a comparative analysis, and give you an answer that's going to be much more useful than if you just ask, is this a good idea? Give it options, let it analyze, and then you're going to look at the results of that comparison instead. Much, much better. Okay, so what does all this mean? Hallucinations are here, and they're not going away. They are part of how large language models work. They are what make large language models creative, and we can debate creativity till the cows come home, but they are much more creative than search engines. But for the last 25 years or so, we have been using search as the primary information retrieval paradigm. That is how we got information. Before, we used to go to the public library or find it in books. But if you've been using the internet, like most of you guys have, for the last few decades, we are now in this paradigm where we think when we talk to a computer, it's just going to pull information for us from a database. Instead, we're generating based on a training corpus, and sometimes if information is not there or has not been trained into the system fully, it's going to give us a hallucination, which is not going to match up with the reality of the world outside. So we need to adapt how we work with these tools accordingly. We cannot take everything that the AI gives us as truth, because sometimes it will not be. Not because the AI is lying to us, but because it just did not have enough information to be able to fill in and give us a probabilistically correct answer in that particular case. That's all. So you need to learn how to prompt it properly. You need to make sure that you don't accept everything it gives you as gospel. You need to make sure you're using extended thinking, deep research, higher level models, not the free model generally, especially on tasks where the accuracy is more important. You just need to retrain your brain and work with the models and their limitations. I don't think that large language models or AI necessarily replace wholesale search. We know that because often the large language models need to use a search tool in order to fill in gaps in their knowledge. But we do need to start to incorporate this new paradigm, this new way of thinking about information retrieval, and in this case, generation. And the people who are working this out, working out that it's not just a smarter Google, but something that can actually create and build with you, are the people who are going to do very, very well with artificial intelligence moving forward. Cool. Thank you for hanging around for the presentation. All of this will be in the newsletter, so I'm going to tidy up the YouTube video. It will go on YouTube itself. So tidy up the live, it will go on YouTube. It will be in the newsletter on aiwithkyle.com, totally free to sign up. And I will create a number of resources to help you. So guides about how to avoid hallucination, etc., etc. It will all go on the website aiwithkyle.com, totally free. So make sure you are signed up there. There's also a bunch of free courses, catalog of playbooks, a bunch of tools, etc., etc. Lots of free stuff for you there, totally free, and you'll get that. Cool. Thank you so much, everybody, and I will see you. Cheers.